Okay, so this is just another way of solving systems. This way is by elimination. The steps to do this is you need to make sure your equations are lined up, and I'll show you more what that looks like in a second. Step 2, then you're going to either add or subtract. The equations to eliminate the variable with the common coefficient. Then what you're going to do is solve for your remaining variable. Once you have that variable solved, then you're going to substitute your answer . Your answer back into the equation, and then solve for the other one. Alright, so let's see what that looks like. Alright, so step 1, we need to make sure that everything is lined up. Notice y is under y, equal sign under equal sign, x is under x's. Okay, so everything is lined up. Then what I want to do is find the one with the common variable, the common coefficient. So I'm going to be looking at my x's and my y's. Notice the y on this equation, I have 1y here. On the bottom equation, I have 1y. Looking at my x's, I have 3 x's and I have 1x. So the 3 and 1 are not the same, but 1 and 1 are. So since these have a common coefficient, what I want to do is make sure that they eliminate. Well, a 1 and a 1 will not eliminate. A 1 and a negative 1 will. So what I'm going to do is, because I want this one to be a negative 1, I'm going to make everything on the bottom opposite. Because if I do it to one thing, I have to do it to everything to make it even. So I'm going to turn this into a negative y. I'm going to turn that into a negative x, and then a plus 2. So notice, y minus y cancels. A positive y and a negative y are opposites, so those cancel. So I have nothing left on that side, that's 0. So what I do with my other stuff is I'm going to add my x's and I'm going to add these numbers together. So I have 3x and a negative 1x. 3 plus negative 1 is 2. I have a positive 4 and a positive 2, so add that together to get a positive 6. So now that my y's are eliminated, I can solve for that x by taking away 6 from both sides. It's going to give me negative 6 equals 2x. And I'm going to divide both sides by 2 to get negative 3 equals x. So now that I know what x is, I'm going to go back to my original equation. I don't like to use the bottom one because we mess with it. You see how I changed it? So I'm going to use the one that's not messed with, so this top one. I'm going to take out the x and replace x with negative 3. So y equals 3, replace x with negative 3 plus 4. Well, 3 times negative 3 is a negative 9. I can't forget about my plus 4. So negative 9 plus 4 is a negative 5. So I know my final answer will be negative 3, negative 5. So everything is lined up on this one. I see 1x, I see 1x, I see 4y's, I see negative 1y. So this is the one that has the common coefficient. Well, I need them to be opposite, so they're both positive. So what I'm going to do is make all of the bottom opposite. Once I do that, I know a positive x and a negative x cancel. And then I'm going to add everything else together. 4y's and 1y, that's going to give me 5y. 13 plus a negative 3 is going to give me a 10. Divide both sides by 5 to get y equals 2. So now I'm going to go back to the first equation, take out y and replace it with 2. So x plus 4, replace y with 2, is equal to 13. Now I can solve for x. So 4 times 2 is 8. Get rid of that 8 by taking away 8 from both sides. So now I know x is equal to 5. So the point at which they would intersect is the point 5, 2. So everything's lined up, so I compare. I have 3 and 3 for x's, negative 10, negative 9 for y's. Since this have the same number, I'm going to work with these guys. Since they're both positive, I need to make sure I turn this one negative, so I do it to the entire bottom. So negative, oops. Change this to a positive, change that to a negative. Positive 3x and a negative 3x cancel. So I'm going to add my y's together. Negative 10 plus 9 is a negative 1y. 14 plus negative 15 is a negative 1. Divide both sides by negative 1 to get y is equal to a positive 1. So now that I know y, I'm going to go back to the first equation, take out y and replace it with 1. So that's going to give me 3x minus 10, replace y with 1, equals 14. And I'm going to solve. 3x drops down. Negative 10 times 1 is a negative 10. 14 on the other side. Add 10 to both sides. It's going to give me 3x equals 24. Divide both sides by 3, and that will leave me with x is equal to 8. So I know the point at which they would intersect is the point 8, 1. Everything's lined up, so I compare. I have 4x's, negative 2x's. 2y's and 2y's, so this has a common coefficient, so I'm going to work with these. But a positive 2 and a positive 2 are not opposite, so I need to make all of the bottom opposite. So that's going to become a positive, negative, and a negative. A positive 2y and a negative 2y cancel. So everything else I add up. A 4x and a positive 2x is going to give me a 6x. 8 and a negative 18, add those together to give me a negative 12. Divide both sides by 6 to give me x is equal to negative 2. So I'm going to go back to the first equation, take out x and replace it with negative 2. So that will give me 4. Replace x with negative 2. Plus 2y is equal to 6. Now I'm going to solve. 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. Plus 2y drops down. Add 8 to both sides. 2y drops. 6 plus 8 is 14. Divide both sides by 2 to get y is equal to 7. So my final answer is negative 2, 7. Everything's lined up, so I compare 4 and negative 4, x's, 9 and 7, y's. So these have the same coefficient, and notice 4x and negative 4x, one's a positive, one's a negative, they are already opposites. So there is no need for me to change these signs down here because these will already eliminate. So I can cross these out, oops, I'm sorry, and go ahead and add up my y's. So 9y's plus 7y's is 16y, 5 plus 11 is 16. Divide both sides by 16, which will leave me with y is equal to 1. We'll go back to that top equation, take out y and replace it with 1. So that's going to give me 4x plus 9, replace y with 1, equals 5. 4x drops, 9 times 1 is 9, and 5 on the other side. I'm going to take 9 away from both sides. That's going to leave me with 4x is equal to negative 4. Divide both sides by 4 to get x is equal to a negative 1. So my final answer is negative 1, 1. Everything's lined up, so I check my x's, 10 and negative 2. Negative 3y's and positive 3y's, so I see a common coefficient here. Notice one is a negative 3, one is a positive 3. They are already opposite, so no need to change the bottom because those y's will already eliminate. So I add my x's. 10 plus negative 2 is 8. 18 plus 6 is 24. Divide both sides by 8. That's going to give me x is equal to 3. So I'm going to go back to my first equation and take out the x and replace it with 3. So I'm going to have 10, replace x with 3, minus 3y equals 18. And let's solve. 10 times 3 is 30. My minus 3y drops down. Take away 30 from each side. Negative 3y drops equals negative 12. Divide both sides by a negative 3. Get y is equal to 4. So my final answer is 3/4. Compare. I have 1x, 3 x's, negative 1y, positive 1y. So they both have 1. So I'm looking at these guys. Notice negative y, positive y. There's no need to change anything because these are already opposite, so they will automatically eliminate. So let's add. 1x and 3x gives us 4x's. 10 plus 18 is going to give us a 28. Divide both sides by 4 to get x is equal to 7. Go back to that first equation, take out x, replace it with 7. So replace x with 7, minus y equals 10. Subtract 7 from both sides. That leaves me with negative y equals 3. I can't stop here. I have a negative in front of y, so I'm going to multiply the entire thing by another negative, which is going to make everything opposite. The opposite of a negative y is a positive y. The opposite of a positive 3 is a negative 3. So now that I have my x and my y, I know the point at which they would intersect is the point 7, negative 3. So on this one, I have 1x and 2x's. My y is negative 3y, negative 3y. So I know I'm going to be looking at these y's since I see a common coefficient. I notice negative 3 and negative 3 are not opposite, so I am going to have to mess with the bottom, make everything opposite. Now that I've done that, I know a negative 3y and a positive 3y will eliminate. And I'm going to add my x's. 1 plus negative 2 is going to give me negative 1x. 11 plus a negative 16 is going to give me a negative 5. Divide both sides by a negative 1 to give me x is equal to a positive 5. So going back to my first equation, I'm going to replace x with 5. So it's going to give me 5 minus 3y equals 11. Take away 5 from each side. Negative 3y drops down. 11 minus 5 is 6. Divide both sides by negative 3 to give me y is equal to a negative 2. So my final answer is the point 5, negative 2. So I compare my x's, negative 2 and 5. I compare my y's, 4 and 4, so I know I'm going to be looking at my y's since they have the same coefficient. I see a positive 4y and a negative 4y. Positive 4 and negative 4 are already opposite, so no need to change the bottom because these will automatically eliminate. And I add my x's together. Negative 2 plus 5 is going to give me 3 x's, and negative 8 plus 20 is going to give me a positive 12. I divide both sides by 3 to get x is equal to 4. So I'm going to go back to that first equation and replace x with 4. So that's going to give me negative 2, replace x with 4, plus 4y equals negative 8. Negative 2 times 4 is a negative 8. My plus 4y drops down, and negative 8 on the other side. Add 8 to both sides. 4y drops. Negative 8 plus 8 is 0. Final step is to divide 4 on each side to get y is equal to 0. So my answer is 4. Oops. 0. All right, so I compare my x's, 3x, 3x. Compare my y's, negative 4y, negative 4y. So I noticed these have the same coefficient, these have the same coefficient. So I'm going to check to see if either one are automatically eliminate. So a positive 3 and a positive 3 are not opposites. A negative 4 and a negative 4 are not opposites, which means I'm going to have to change my bottom one, make everything opposite. So negative, a plus, positive. All right, a positive 3x and a negative 3x. Those are opposites, so they cancel. A negative 4y and a positive 4y. Those are also opposites, so they will also cancel. So everything on this side canceled, which is leaving me with 0. On the other side, I add negative 10 plus 13 is going to give me a 3. So that reads 0 equals 3, which is not true. That is false. So remember, if we get a false statement that tells me there is no solution, and if I get no solution as my answer, that means those lines were parallel. All right, on this one, I compare my x's, 2 and negative 2. I compare my y's, a positive 1 and a negative 1. 2x and negative 2x are already opposites, so there's no reason to change this bottom because those x's would automatically eliminate. Oops. A positive 2x and a negative 2x cancel. But the same thing here, a positive y and a negative y are opposites, so those would also cancel. So everything cancels, leaving me with 0. So I add the other side, negative 10 plus 10, which adds together to give 0. So 0 equals 0. So that is a true statement. So remember, when it's a true statement, it tells us that we have an infinite number of solutions. So if we have infinite solutions, remember that tells us that we're going to have 2 of the same line, a line that falls right on top of the other line. I guess I could draw that a little better. One line on top of the other line. All right, later guys.